Off the Beaten Path, America's Wilderness. Wanted, adventurous artist and photographer for assignment in the West. Rough trails, little pay, but the scenery will knock your socks off. Landscape painter Thomas Moran traveled on horseback through the American wilderness. He worked side by side with photographers to capture amazing views of geysers, bubbling pools, and sunlit canyons. After the Civil War, Americans looked to the West for adventure. Trappers and traders returned to the East from a region along the Yellowstone River. They told of natural wonders that seemed from another world. They described rocks the color of the sun, shooting geysers, and hot springs boiling up in all colors of the rainbow. Were they crazy, or could such things really exist? Thomas Moran answered the question once and for all. Schneibers magazine hired Moran to illustrate an article on Yellowstone. He based his pictures on descriptions and sketches made by people who'd been there. When he finished, he had to go west to see for himself. In the summer of 1871, Moran joined a government sponsored expedition. Ferdinand Hayden led a survey of Yellowstone. Hayden wanted to convince the U.S. Congress to protect Yellowstone. He knew the job would be much easier if he could bring back pictures of the spectacular landscape, so he brought along a painter and a photographer. The expedition traveled hundreds of miles on horseback over rugged trails. Though he was frail and inexperienced with horses, Moran made the best of things. He made friends with expedition photographer William Henry Jackson. Together, they selected the best views for their work. Moran helped Jackson frame his compositions. Jackson's photographs provided details for Moran's painting. Here's a little tidbit about Moran. He was born in England in 1837, and he moved to Philadelphia with his family when he was only 7 years old. He apprenticed as a wood engraver, but left to join his brother's art studio. Moran sketched and painted landscapes. In his spare time, he read poetry filled with romantic descriptions of nature. In some ways, Jackson had the toughest job. He had to be an artist, acrobat, and chemist all in one. In those early days of photography, images were made with fragile glass plates and large, heavy cameras. Jackson had to set up the camera, focus, and run into a tent to bathe the glass plate in light-sensitive chemicals. Then he scrambled back, put the plate in the camera, took the picture, and ran back to the tent to develop it. The timing for everything was tricky. Sometimes the camera stood on the edge of a cliff. Moran had his own challenges. He sketched the landscape in small, vivid watercolors. He painted the steep rock walls in glowing yellows and reds that seemed to burn from within. At home in his studio, he painted his favorite scene on a huge canvas measuring 7 by 12 feet. The Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone looks across the deep canyon to a distant waterfall. Moran included members of the expedition for scale. Can you find the expedition members in this close-up? Moran painted with his vivid memory. He also used Jackson's black and white photographs for help with some details. But he thought painting a dramatic impression of a scene was more important than showing every detail accurately. He painted ideal views in a realistic style. Soon after Moran returned from Yellowstone, John Wesley Powell led the first expedition down the mighty Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. Most people thought the rapids would kill anyone who attempted the trip. Powell had lost an arm in the Civil War, but that never stopped him. He strapped a wooden chair to the center of his boat, the Emma Dean. Then he tied himself to the chair so that he wouldn't be thrown off. John Powell led the first expedition, like I said, but during his second scientific expedition down the Colorado, he took 2 friends with him, Moran and a German-born photographer, John Hillers. In this photograph taken by Hillers, Moran, in the dark shirt, stands next to Justin E. Colburn. Colborne wrote about the Powell expedition for the New York Times. An Indian boy in buckskin clothes sits in front. Morin and Hillers made many images of the Grand Canyon. These show different views of the Colorado River. From high above, the river looks as thin as a ribbon. Hillers showed the dramatic depth of the Grand Canyon by including a human for scale. Do you see the person standing on the edge of the cliff to the left? Morin painted many other Western wonders. He made his watercolor sketch of Half Dome in Yosemite region of California. Using white, black, and brown, he produced subtle differences in color to show the rocky surface. Later in life, Morin painted many landscapes along the East Coast, but he returned to the western wilderness many times. With paints and brushes, the great landscape painter captured the beauty of the West. He also helped preserve it for generations to come.